10. May 1945. Munich. In a cheap soldier's notebook, a clerk named Karl Weber wrote a sentence he would not speak aloud. The future here will be built from rubble and from silence. He meant it as a fact. He meant it as a warning. He meant it as a burden. Munich had surrendered on 30 April. The American 7th Army rolled in. Tanks idled by the Isar. The swastikas were pulled down. The white flags went up in apartment windows above the broken streets. The city lay smashed, 45% of the buildings destroyed, 50% damaged, the rest cracked or scorched. Women tugged children and chipped bricks from collapsed walls with bare hands. Men missing, men dead, men not yet home. The immediate arithmetic of survival presented itself. The mathematics of calories, the mathematics of coal, the mathematics of coal. The mathematics of not being seen by the wrong person at the wrong time. There were curfews. There were posters in the new occupiers' language and in clipped German, turn in weapons. No gatherings. Amnesty for information. There were rumors of retribution. There were rumors of redress. They traveled faster than the trams, which did not run. Karl's apartment on Schillerstrasse had no glass in the windows. He boarded them with wood from a blown-out shop. His wife, Liesel, had gone to the countryside with her sister during the heavy raids of January and had not returned. He went to the central registry in the destroyed Wittelsbacher Palais and filled out a form. Name, age, last seen. District. He saw his writing, neat as a ledger, and felt ashamed by its steadiness. He registered with the military government on 12 May. The line stretched down Sonnenstrasse. A captain from Ohio stamped ration cards. The stamp had an eagle with outstretched wings. The wings were different from the ones on the old cards. The ration scale was printed on coarse paper. Heavy laborers got the most. Children got milk when there was milk. Adults like Karl got too little for the work of carrying stones. The curfew began at 2000 Rund. The city learned the new clock. The new timekeeping was precise. The mathematics of the occupation began in lists: name, address, party membership, function, employment. These became the core of civil life. 16 May 1945. A neighbor, Frau Heidinger, told him about a pile of coats outside of Dachau. She meant bodies. She had seen photographs posted by the Americans on the walls of a seized police station. He went to see. The captions were in English and in German. This is what you did. He stood in the hallway under a portrait that had not yet been removed, and read a sentence that did not change the faces. Occupation reports from this period, preserved in the Bundesarchiv and in the records of the Office of Military Government, United States, OMGSs, list German reactions, feigned ignorance, scattered expressions of shame, generalized deflection. An OMGS weekly intelligence summary from late May notes widespread belief that atrocities were the work of a small minority. Disgust at photos, emphasis on own suffering. The language is dry. It is meant to be. Administrations think in categories, in numbers, in signals. But the look in the eyes in the registries did not come in numbers. It came as evasion, as fatigue, as the unsteady line of a signature. June. The Trümmerfrauen emerged. Women of every age, sleeves rolled, heads wrapped in scarves, carrying baskets of salvaged brick. They formed human chains. Stone by stone, they knocked off mortar. They stacked usable bricks in piles like red loaves. Their names appear in municipal lists as volunteers. Oral histories record their hands bleeding, their shoulders swollen. They were paid in extra rations, sometimes in a slice of bread. Photographs show them smiling for the camera. The smiles read as pride. They also read as endurance. In a city with most of its men absent, female strength became a public spectacle and a hidden calculus of grief. Carl offered his labor 2 days a week when he was not searching for Liesel. He learned the feel of an intact brick against a crumbling one. He learned how quickly ash stained his shirt. He learned to count steps up a broken staircase with a beam across it. The rubble mounds were numbered by the city's building office, which was now an office without a roof. The top of the Frauenkirche towers were black with soot. A bell had cracked and sounded like a man's broken voice. July. The black market coalesced. Cigarettes became the currency of trust. A lucky strike was a unit. A pack was a sum. A carton was wealth. Occupation reports note that prices were quoted in kippen. 1 egg, 2 cigarettes. A kilo of potatoes, 6. A pair of serviceable shoes, an entire carton. A neighbor's wedding ring bought a sack of flour. The mathematics of dignity had a price. The arithmetic of hunger pushed it down. The military government set curfews and wrote ordinances. It tasked German police, now under supervision with enforcement. It created new boards. It posted placards about denazification. This would be the word that produced the most paperwork and the most silence. August. Denazification orders were expanded. The Fragebogen arrived. 131 questions. Name. Date of birth. Party membership. SA, SS, NSKK, NS Frauenschaft. Positions held. Applications made. Donations given. Oath sworn. Endorsements of the Führer. If yes, to whom? Why? Witnesses. The same neat handwriting that had filled in missing persons forms was applied to this. Karl had been in the German Labour Front. He had joined in 1934 because his boss had told him to. He had marched twice. He had worn a tie pin. He had paid dues. He had never given a speech. He had signed orders for machine parts in a factory that had converted to munitions. He included none of the adjectives. He wrote facts. He wrote them in a way that anticipated judgment. Occupation authorities created Spruchkammern in each district, German-run tribunals under Allied oversight. There were 5 categories: Hauptschuldig, major offenders; Belästigt offenders; Minder belästigt, lesser offenders; Mitläufer followers; Entlastet, exonerated. The mathematics of guilt was institutionalized. Forms were filled, hearings were held, affidavits were collected. The language turned to formula. Karl got a date for a hearing in November 1945. The room was cold. The panels sat under a portrait still unremoved. He presented a Perschelschein from his neighbor, a socialist who had been briefly in Dachau, stating that Karl was no active Nazi, a decent man. The word Perschelschein, literally a Perschel certificate, as in the laundry powder, indicated a cleansing. The tribunal questioned him about a contribution to a winter aid collection in 1937. He said it had been obligatory. They asked if he had denounced anyone. He said he had not. No file said otherwise. Allied intelligence summaries from winter 1945-46 show the numbers stacking up. In the US zone, more than 13 million people filled out questionnaires. In Bavaria, a sample shows that under 2% were classified as offenders in the first months. By 1947, the majority were Mitläufer or Entlastet. The system needed stability more than it needed thorough justice. It needed the trains to run. It needed coal to be delivered. It needed clerks who could add columns, and officers who could direct traffic, and teachers who could stand before blackboards. It needed people who knew how the machines fit together, even if they had fit those machines together under a flag that now could not be flown. The mathematics of guilt turned to the arithmetic of staffing. The lists of ex-Nazi teachers dismissed in 1945 slowly intersected with the lists of reopened schools in 1947. A city cannot wait forever for saints. A city requires functionaries. January 1946. The worst winter. The hunger winter. The Elbe and the Main were choked with ice. Coal shipments stalled. In unheated apartments, people burned furniture, books, anything combustible. City councils met with coats on. Mothers bartered wedding silver for sugar at suburban farms. People made hamsterfahrten, hamster trips, to the countryside, carrying valuables to exchange for bacon and potatoes. Trains were too full. People rode on roofs, on buffers, on anything that moved. Municipal food offices posted allotments, 1,050 calories per day for heavy laborers, 680 for ordinary adults. Allied reports call this starvation ration. The language is clinical. Bodies are not. Karl's notebook records in a tight script that smells like coal dust. 14 January, Frau Heidinger fainted on the stairs. We carry water up 4 flights because the pump is frozen. I traded my winter coat for 5 kilos of barley. His handwriting on these entries leans more sharply to the right. His ink froze once, and he had to hold the pen near the candle to coax it. In February, he started work at the municipal housing office. The old director had been classified belestit and was removed. The deputy, who had no party record, was promoted. He asked Karl to come in for 3 days a week to help with vouchers and records and to answer the constant knocking. Karl was given a desk with a cracked top. He was given a ledger and a stamp. He was told to allocate rooms, beds, access to a stove, 1 hour per day per floor if there is gas, 1 pail of coal per family. The mathematics of rooms is the mathematics of anger. A woman with 3 children wants to know why a stranger from the east gets a bed in her front room. An expellee family of 5 arrives with papers stamped by a British officer and a railway token to Munich's. The father had been a schoolteacher in Königsberg. He now stands in the hallway and says his name is Kraus and that he has no relatives. His wife's hands look like she has never slept. The city had to absorb millions from the east, from East Prussia, from Pomerania, from Silesia, from the Sudetenland. They came in ragged columns in 1945 and 1946, spilling out of trains that had to make room for more. The doors opened, the platform filled. No one clapped. The records show that in some districts of Bavaria by 1950, more than 20% of the population were expellees. In Lower Saxony and Schleswig-Holstein, the numbers were higher. Some villages doubled, some tripled. There were cows in sheds and Germans in stables. The arithmetic of resentment grew. Locals called expellees Sorpreisner or refugees like a slur. Expellees called locals fat cats who had hoarded. Old class lines fused with new. Karl recorded a line after a dispute in March 1946. We are dividing a loaf that grows smaller when we argue about it. It reads like a proverb. It reads like a resignation. April. The displaced persons. Jews, Poles, Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Italians, French, Romanians, who had been brought to Germany as forced labor, or who had survived camps or who had fled the new regimes in the East, now lived in barracks in the German countryside, in requisitioned schools, in former Wehrmacht installations. In Bavaria, major DP camps were opened in Feldafing, Landsberg, Fehrenwald. A U.S. occupation report of April 1946 notes, DPs increasingly assertive in securing supplies, Germans resent priority status. The language collides with the street. The barbed wire that had kept people in now kept others out. Karl passed Feldafing in May on an office visit to collect forms from a liaison billet. He saw numbers tattooed on forearms at the gate. He saw a Star of David painted on a door. There is a line in his notebook. I have never before seen a number on a body. He writes nothing else for 3 pages. Within Munich, a market opened near Theresienwiese where DPs bartered US rations, and German civilians came to trade. Tensions flared. An Allied intelligence summary recorded, "Germans complain they have everything. We have nothing. DPs complain they have everything. DPs complain. They watch us as if we did this to ourselves." The language is scriptural in its antiphony. Inside the municipal offices, there were quiet orders. Do not ask DPs for German papers. They will have different documents. Some staff did not comply. The confrontation with victims alternated with strategies of denial. The city held a commemorative for the destroyed synagogues in July 1946. The mayor spoke of a tragedy for all Munich. He did not say, "We did this." It would be years before such sentences appeared in official texts. In the meantime, people talked about bombing raids. They talked about the dead in the cellars. They talked about their sons lost at Stalingrad. They talked about their daughters assaulted by Soviet soldiers in the east. They talked about the trek in February in snow like a field of knives. They did not use the word Schuld where others could hear. The mathematics of guilt was not finished by forms. It had only begun. Karl's denazification file was closed in October 1946. He was classified a Mitläufer, a follower. He was fined 50 Reichsmarks, a currency that soon would not exist. He was permitted to continue in the housing office. His neighbor, the former party block warden, was classified minder belastet and put to work sweeping streets. He was not jailed. He kept his ration card. He kept his house because a family from Silesia had moved into his extra room. From the arithmetic of the Spruchkammer one draws the sum, a society asked to judge itself while starving it of food, warmth, and a usable past. The British in Hamburg sent back monthly reports. German populace increasingly focuses on own losses. Nazi atrocities accepted as real in general but minimized in personal responsibility. The Americans in Frankfurt sent, "Germans exhibit notable adaptability to new political realities." The French in Baden wrote, "Administrative collaboration improved markedly after food shipments stabilized." The Soviets wrote their own reports and published none of them to Germans. Their tribunals were swift, and their prisons were full. 1947. The Cold War began to be the grammar of all decisions. The B-Zone formed in January, merging US and British zones for economic administration. The French dragged their heels on joining. The Soviets watched. The mathematics of coal intersected with the mathematics of ideology. The Ruhr's output mattered more than the purity of personnel files. The Americans began to ask who could manage a steel plant, more than who had chaired a party cell in 1937. German communists in the Western zones argued for thorough denazification and deep reforms, and found themselves monitored by police. For the Allies, anti-communism became a filter. It did not erase the fact of the camps. It did not justify the old loyalties. It simply reweighted the sums. The municipal housing office faced new directives. Give preference to families with children. Give preference to those employed. Do not rehouse those evicted for cause. Provide separate housing for DPs. Karl spent his days calculating floor space. He learned to measure in centimeters and in grudges. He learned to write letters with careful words. "We regret to inform you." He learned to hold his face when a man placed 2 cigarettes by his ledger. He learned when to accept them. He learned when to push them back. He wrote in his notebook one sentence, "The new state is teaching me how to be honest selectively." June 20, 1948. Currency reform in the Western zones. The old Reichsmark was abolished. Every resident received 40 Deutsche Mark, then a second 20 shortly after. Prices transformed. Store windows filled overnight with things unseen for years. It felt like an illusion. It was careful planning. It was also a moral event. The mathematics of scarcity shifted. The black market cigarettes returned to lungs instead of being stored in drawers. A picture in Karl's notebook shows stacks of old Reichsmarks like a funeral pyre. He wrote beneath it, "The money that bought my shame is now worth nothing." What does this make my shame worth? 2 days later, the Soviets cut land access to Berlin. The blockade of June 24 started a new kind of arithmetic: air corridors, tonnage of coal and flour, the number of landings per day at Tempelhof and Gatow. The candy dropped for children below. The city of Munich was far from Berlin, but the calculations traveled. The Cold War's mathematics put wind under the wings of the West German state before the state existed. The implicit bargain of denazification hardened. To build a bulwark, you need bricks. You use those at hand. Some are stained. You stack them anyway. You plan the facade for later. 1949. The Federal Republic of Germany was founded on 23 May. The Basic Law was promulgated in Bonn. Karl listened to it read on the radio. Someone had fixed with wire and hope the words, "Die Würde der Menschen ist unantastbar." The dignity of man is inviolable, came 14 years too late for many. They entered the air like a choral phrase. The mathematics of law replaced the mathematics of decree. Press laws replaced sedition laws. The criminal code was revised patch by patch. The police wore new uniforms and had many of the same faces. Marshall Plan shipments began in earnest. American flour in sacks marked ERP arrived in the rail yards. Milk powder, cotton, steel billets, machinery. Boxes labeled care went to families with addresses written in careful script. Oral histories recall the taste of peanut butter for the first time. Photographs show men grinning at the wheel of new trucks and women holding packets of nylon stockings with a look like disbelief. The German economy inhaled. The cities built again. The municipal building office, where Karl now had a title, moved into a reconstructed hall. He was given a fresh rubber stamp. He was given a desk with a smooth top. He was told to plan for growth. In the denazification records for 1949, one finds notices of amnesty. The federal government passed measures to end proceedings for categories of people who had done nothing more than join. The Spruchkammern were dissolved in 1950. Files were boxed and sent to archives. Some were simply set aside. Some were burned. The moral math of the Republic had to address pensions. The so-called 131er Gesetz, passed in 1951, applied to public servants who had been removed for reasons of affiliation but who had not committed crimes. It restored salaries and seniority. It made sense if the goal was stability. It stung victims and those who thought that never again required named names and empty chairs. Karl's office took on a new task in 1952, the reallocation of apartments vacated by British officers who were leaving leased German houses. British control shrank as sovereignty grew. The city created waiting lists. Expellees without a permanent address were to be prioritized. A meeting note reads, "Conflicts with locals intensifying. Consider community councils with mixed representation." The mathematics of room assignments became the politics of neighborhoods. A child from East Prussia and a child from Munich sat next to each other in a school and compared dialect words for the same things. They came home and corrected their parents' stories. School books in 1953 have a particular tone. They depict the Nazi period as a time of seduction and misdirection. They dwell on the suffering of bombings. They stress the courage of citizens in rebuilding. They mention camps in a paragraph. They devote a chapter to refugees arriving with nothing. Karl's son, Hans, brought home an assigned reader with a story about a boy whose father had died at the front and whose mother joined the Trümmerfrauen to salvage bricks. Hans underlined a sentence: "With work, we become free again." The sentence carried an unintentional echo that no one pointed out in class. Public commemorations grew ritualized. The city marked the anniversary of the Great Air Raid of November 1944. It held wreath-layings at the ruins that had been preserved as memorials. A small plaque was placed at the site of a destroyed synagogue with the words, "We remember." The past was triangulated between bravery, grief, and discretionary omission. Photographs in municipal albums show a dignified mayor speaking in front of a new department store. The caption reads, "Munich rises." There is no caption for the DP camp closing down outside town as its last residents left for Israel, for the United States, for a life elsewhere. Former party members sat at desks. Former resistance members sat at desks. It mattered who had learned to keep a folder straight. It mattered who knew how to arrange a budget. The mathematics of competence is not moral mathematics. The West needed a functioning state. Denazification had been a moral necessity and a political experiment. The experiment was declared complete when numbers looked stable. The moral necessity did not expire. It changed address. It moved into living rooms. Karl's notebook shows fewer entries in the early 1950s. He married again in 1950, a widow named Elizabeth Meyer, whose husband had died in Italy. They had a daughter, Anna, in 1952. The name meant grace. He wrote about her first steps. He wrote less about the past. He wrote more about rent. He did not write about his walks near Dachau on Sundays sometimes when he passed the new memorial stone and did not know whether to stop. The economy grew. Factories ran. In the BMW plant north of the city, motorcycles rolled off assembly lines, then cars. Siemens rewired itself for consumer goods as well as power stations. A foundry that had cast steel for artillery in 1943 now cast fittings for washing machines. The Wirtschaftswunder appeared as if conjured. It was a trapdoor built in stages: currency reform, external assistance, internal discipline, a population trained in regimentation now applying that habit to productive peace. Credit expanded. The first television sets blinked in shop windows. The first cheap holidays in Italy sent buses through the Brenner. Helmut in accounts bought a refrigerator. He showed Karl the ice cube tray like a child's trick. The psychology shifted. Pride grew in a new constitution, in new borders that were defended by treaties and customs officers, instead of by men in steel helmets. The mathematics of the Cold War set the budget, guns or butter, and then both. The Korean War sent demand for steel, and German steel obliged. The Americans wanted a strong West Germany. They wanted it inside an alliance. They wanted it as proof that the defeat of an ideology could lead to prosperity. The price of this proof included making room for men who had once worn black uniforms in suits with good tailoring. Police files list the hiring of former Wehrmacht officers to supervise training for the new Bundesgrenzschutz. Civil service lists show men barred in 1945 now returning in 1952 with back pay. Occupation reports note privately the problematic optics and publicly the progress in integration. The mathematics of anti-communism outweighed the mathematics of reparation in Washington and in Bonn. This is not a condemnation. It is a statement of fact. Complexity is not absolution. It is description. And the other side of the border hardened. Munich was policed by Americans. Berlin was divided and blockaded and supplied by air. Dresden's ruins were turned into a narrative about fascism and socialist victory. Rostock's shipyards turned out hulls for a state that would never quite be strong. The victims of Nazism in the East were placed into a story where the category German was kind of a suspect, except for the good German who became a socialist. In the West, the victims who stayed were gradually acknowledged in new ways. Compensation laws were passed, calibrated by year, category, degree of injury. The mathematics of compensation is a poor cousin to the mathematics of grief. The sums never balance. The DP camps closed. Feldafing shut in 1951. Fehrenwald lingered longer, becoming a housing estate. The empty barracks were repurposed. The furniture was carried away. A generation later, people would search for stones from those foundations to mark them. In the 1950s, the city wanted to forget. In 1954, West Germany won the World Cup. The Wunder von Bern, men cried. Women waved flags. Boys named Hans kicked footballs in courtyards still filled with dust, and for a few hours the war belonged to their parents more than to them. In Karl's notebook, we sang and I felt a knot loosen. Then I thought of the losers we had cheered for, and I felt the knot again. He writes that he held hands on his shoulders on Leopold Straucher. He writes that an old man saluted without thinking and then turned the gesture into a wave. He writes that this is how memory moves in the body. He would hear of the trials in 1958 and 1963-65, the Einsatzgruppen trial, and then the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials. He would listen to testimony on the radio, men speaking evenly about exact work, how to stage selections, how to shoot efficiently, how to dispose of bodies. He would turn off the radio. He would go for a walk. He would come back and turn it on again. The mathematics of killing were recited like minutes from a meeting. Numbers, schedules, trains. Tonnage of coke used to burn bodies. The voice of the prosecutor rose, then it sank. The defendants were middle-aged by then, with bellies and hairlines like the men in Karl's office. Not in my name, some said. In whose name? Others asked. The city did not convene a forum. It held more dignified ceremonies. The plaques grew more specific. Names appeared on stones. The synagogue was rebuilt on another street. The old one was left as a gap. Memory learned to mark absences with presence. The expellees, who had lived for years with suitcases against the wall, were told they could settle wherever they had settled. The occupations wrote their last reports and left. The Bundesarchiv boxed the denazification records and stamped them with codes that are still being decoded. The municipal housing office shifted from triage to planning. Green space, schools, tram lines, mid-century modern buildings sat where once there had been Baroque. The past was stratified like the layers of a house where new wallpaper covers old wallpaper covers paint. In places where the wall had fallen, people collected scraps and made collages. The City Museum opened a room that promised to tell the story of those years. The labels were careful. The words were sanded down. Through it all, Karl held an office key and a stamp. He learned the new law. He learned that forgiveness is not a decree and not an administrative procedure. He learned that silence is not the same as peace, and that it was the price that everyone agreed to pay for a few decades of heat and food and the luxury of not having to think about what the man across the desk had been in 1943. He had personal ghosts. Liesel's name never appeared in registries. He went once to the office that handled Eastern affairs and spoke to a woman who had a map of the old provinces pinned to a board. He wrote letters to a man in Rosenheim who had been on the same evacuation train. He received one reply. I believe she disembarked at Mühldorf when the conductor said the line ahead was gone. He went there in 1947. He asked at the church. He looked at a cemetery where crosses leaned and names had been added in chalk. He did not find her. He married again, and that too is a data point in the mathematics of moving on. He had bureaucratic ghosts. files of men who had signed orders for the allocation of Jewish apartments in 1938 after Aryanization. Now those men submitted requests for pensions. He signed the forms. He could not sign them. The law required, and the law was now the flag. Everyone saluted. He signed with a pen whose nib he had to sharpen with his own knife on some mornings. He logged the requests and then at home, late, wrote a single line in his notebook. Every rubber stamp makes a sound, whether we hear it or not. 1959. A microphone appeared on the desk in the office, and a young man from a local radio station asked officials, "What is the greatest challenge now?" The director answered, "Modernization," and smiled. The men nodded. Carl said nothing. He thought, the greatest challenge now is not to lie to ourselves about what we are doing when we say modernization. He wrote that in his notebook when he went home. 1961. The wall went up in Berlin. The arithmetic of the Cold War. People in Munich watched it on television. They shook their heads. They said they were glad to be where they were. They felt exasperation and a vindication of their choices. The city held a solidarity rally. The language was about freedom now. The old words were closed in boxes. In 1963, when the Auschwitz trial began, Karl had Anna at 10 and Hans at 15. He took Anna to the public library. He sat her down with a children's book about the war. The book focused on bombings, on soldiers, on a family making soup from potato peels. He added a sentence in his own voice. And there were people who were hated and hunted and killed because of their names and their grandparents, and we must know their names too. He spoke it quietly. He spoke it to a child. He did not speak it at work. In his notebook after listening to testimony that December, he wrote, "The numbers were meant to say impossible not to know. But the impossible had occurred and people had not known, because knowing requires conditions we had refused. It is a dense sentence. It reads like a report. It is an attempt at a formula." He kept the notebook in a drawer. He did not tell his children not to look. He did not tell his children not to look. They did not look. Years later, after his death, his son found the first page again and recognized the handwriting as a way of speaking when no one wanted to listen. The city became prosperous. The wealth got gloss. The streets got names for the past, some of them neutral: Memorial Street, Reconstruction Avenue. On a winter evening, a plaque was unveiled with the words, "We honor